This is Mike Johnson with the download edition of World Business Report for Wednesday, February the 11th. Allegations that the British bank HSBC colluded to help its customers avoid tax lead to angry exchanges in Parliament.
People should pay their taxes in our country, and no government has been tougher than this one in chasing down tax evasion and tax avoidance.
What next for cash-strapped Greece as European finance ministers meet to discuss its fate?
The only solution is exiting the euro, having its own highly devalued currency, and trying to struggle along in the world.
The economics of giving birth, why children are so much more expensive in some countries than others. We hop aboard the latest generation of driverless cars.
I've just got into what looks like a giant golf buggy. Touch this screen here. Welcome aboard, it's saying. Press start, set off driving, except that no one is driving, a computer is driving.
And as two of America's best-known television presenters step down, we'll hear how much damage that will do to the networks who employ them. How much did they know? When did they know it? And what did they do about it? Britain's tax authorities have been feeling the heat in Parliament today, following this week's allegations that the bank HSBC colluded to help wealthy people and rich corporations hide money in Swiss bank accounts to avoid tax. The accounts aren't illegal, and there's no evidence that those who held them broke any tax rules. But the new revelations led to angry exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, with the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Ed Miliband, accusing David Cameron of failing to get to grips with the issue.
Linked to the HSBC tax avoidance scandal are 7 Tory donors, including a former treasurer of the Tory party, who between them have given nearly £5 million to the Conservative Party. How can the Prime Minister explain the revolving door between Tory party HQ and the Swiss branch of HSBC?
I saw this list just before coming to Prime Minister's questions, and one of the people named is the Labour donor Lord Paul, who funded Gordon Brown's election campaign. I am very clear. People should pay their taxes in our country, and no government has been tougher than this one in chasing down tax evasion and tax avoidance.
There were angry exchanges too during a parliamentary committee session between MP Margaret Hodge, who's chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and also Lynn Homer. She heads up Britain's tax authority. That's Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or HMRC. Our economics correspondent Andrew Verity watched what went on.
This was a really bad-tempered exchange. You're talking about a bunch of MPs who were livid with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs for not catching up with all of the tax evaders who they believed must be on the list that was leaked and stolen by Herr Falciani, the former HSB Swiss employee. They thought HMRC, being in possession of such a treasure trove of evidence, should have been making more of it and trying to do something with it, yet there had only been one prosecution. Now, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs explained that they'd gone after 1,100 people out of 3,600 on the Falciani files, and those were the ones that they believed owed them money. Now, of those, they whittled it down to about 150 who might be up for a serious criminal prosecution. But of those, only 3 were sent on to the Crown Prosecution Service that decides whether to prosecute people, and only 1 was actually prosecuted. And that's led Margaret Hodge, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, to give a bit of heat to the Chief Executive of HMRC, Lynn Homer.
It's a risk worth taking. The worst that can happen to you, if HMRC can be bothered to catch up with you, is that you may have to pay, you won't have a prosecution, you won't have any shame, you won't be an example to anybody else, you'll get away with it. And that's a terrible message to get out to British taxpayers. It's a really rotten message. Chris, sorry. I get that
was a statement, not a question, but it's not correct.
And that last voice you heard there was Lynn Homer, who's head of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And Andy, she responded pretty robustly.
Yes, so robustly, in fact, that the questioners were hardly able to get a word in edgeways. She was interrupting them before the questions had even come out. I think because Lynn Homer feels that she has a genuinely good position to defend. She feels that HMRC has really done its job and that it has gone after people where it could. She pointed out, for example, that the criminal test required to have enough evidence to launch a prosecution was much higher than the test of what you can do to put something in a newspaper based on the evidence you've got from her Falciani or anybody else. So her point was that they didn't have enough to launch prosecutions in a lot of these cases, but the MPs remain incredulous that they had so much data, stolen data that showed what was inside the Swiss bank accounts, and yet they still didn't go after it. Only £135 million of tax was collected. Now that seems like quite a lot of money, but if you compare that to France or Spain, where there were people with less money in their accounts in Switzerland, yet on the other hand they managed to retrieve more of the owed tax.
These HSBC allegations have put this issue of tax avoidance right back on the political agenda as well, haven't they? Not just here in the UK, but elsewhere. And also this issue of party political donations, donors too.
Yes. Now, one has to distinguish between these things because the party political donors have been named as having Swiss accounts, but it's not alleged that they were involved in tax evasion, which, of course, is the illegal thing. It's put not only tax avoidance, but tax evasion, the whole business of keeping money from the tax authorities, hiding it from the tax authorities and having undeclared accounts. It's put that right at the heart of the political agenda. It's at the heart of the conversation, not only in Westminster, but also in New York, in Washington, in Argentina, in Belgium and in Paris. They're all talking about how they can get more money from tax evaders. But of course, a lot of the people named as having accounts aren't necessarily evaders themselves. There's nothing illegal about having a Swiss account. The thing that's illegal is keeping it from the tax authorities.
That was our economics correspondent, Andrew Verity. Now, who will blink first? There is apparent deadlock between Greece and its euro area partners, especially Germany, right now. The new Greek government can't afford to pay its bills. It'll need another bailout within weeks, but it's not keen on the strings of austerity that would come with it. Germany, though, is adamant that Greece must pay back what it owes and stick to its promises on economic reform. Well, that is the background to today's emergency meeting of the single currency's 19 finance ministers in Brussels. So where will this modern-day Greek odyssey go next? For an international perspective, I turn to the veteran American economist Erwin Stelzer at the Hudson Institute in Washington.
I think they'll work something out that will get them over the end of February deadline with some concessions from the Greeks and some new words to describe an extension of the loan. But it's not tenable in the long run. They can do this short-run fix. Remember, Greece has been living on the kindness of strangers since 1947, when Harry Truman bailed them out. In 1981, Brussels bailed them out. When they joined the European Community in 2001, the Euroland bailed them out. When it was perfectly clear they were not eligible, they had cooked the books, but Brussels turned a blind eye to that. And in 2010, they got bailed out during the euro crisis. So this is a non-viable economy as it's now structured, which has debt equal to 175% of its GDP, which can never be repaid. It's a great fiction to think they can repay that debt. They would have to grow about 10% a year forever.
So inevitably, it's Germany that's going to have to blink first in all of this, then, is it? Do you feel?
I would think so. Now, it depends how you blink. There have been since 1976 in the world about 60 sovereign debt defaults. Now, you can call them restructurings, you can call them extensions. Essentially, they defaulted. And so it's no great tragedy if it defaults. I think the problem is going to be that Greece is living in a world in which the value of its currency is set by highly efficient Germany, which runs a huge trade surplus. Their exports are over $1 trillion a year. It can't possibly become internationally competitive when its currency is set by an as efficient an economy as Germany, which sets the value of the euro. The only solution is exiting the euro, having its own highly devalued currency, and trying to struggle along in the world.
Yeah,
and
in the meantime,
the government knows that, the EU knows that, the creditors know that, and so I suspect the only solution is going to be some write-down of Greek debt.
There's plenty of talk around at the moment that if Greece can't prize any more money out of Germany and its single currency partners, then in that case it might turn to the US, to China, to Russia. Instead, let's take your country, the US, first. Would Washington be prepared to prop up Greece, do you think?
No, for two reasons. One is we have a Republican Congress which has never been enthusiastic about foreign aid of any kind. Two, to do that, that would mean we would antagonize the European Union, one of our biggest trading partners, in order to enable Greece to send us olives. I don't think that that's going to happen.
What about the prospect of funding then from China or Russia for Greece?
Well, Russia would be sort of fun. I mean, they have a currency that is collapsing, an economy that is collapsing. And so I guess they assume that somehow their paper for credit is slightly better than Greek paper. I just don't see that happening, although you can never tell with Putin. I mean, he may have a political reason for doing it, and the left-wing party that now controls the Greek government, that now is the Greek government, is very pro-Russian. So that's, I would call that a remote possibility. China will have to decide whether it can get, among other things, an airport and a port out of this and some foothold in Europe, in that part of Europe.
You mean a Greek airport or port?
Yes, I'm sorry, because the Greeks have backed down on saying they would not privatize their airport. So the Chinese might see some geopolitical advantage that's worth, I mean, what are we talking about? They need a bridge loan of 5 billion euros. That's China probably has that in its petty cash drawer. So that's a possibility, but it would have to be for geopolitical, not for economic reasons.
That was Erwin Stelzer at the Hudson Institute in Washington. You're listening to World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Well, time now for the latest from the financial markets. Chris Beecham at IG Markets joins me live. And Chris, the fate of Greece is still troubling investors.
Very much so. I think it's the unknown unknowns that could emerge from today's meeting. We don't really expect any real progress to be made. At best, they might get some sort of loan that tides them over to the end of February. But that only, of course, kicks the can down the road for another month or so. And while the Eurozone is very good at that, it doesn't solve the problem in the long term. Both sides are so entrenched that any agreement this early in the discussion is really unlikely at this stage.
OK, this one will run and run, I suspect. Meanwhile, there's been a big fall in the share value in London today of a big energy explorer called Tullow Oil.
Exactly. Tullow Oil's been suffering for a long time now because of this fall in the oil price and also because of the failure of oil wells. Now, it has suffered more than the big names like BP and Shell because it's just an exploration company. It doesn't have a refining or a marketing operation for oil to fall back on. Investors are very concerned that the cutbacks in the capital expenditure program, the exploration program, and the suspension of the current dividend mean there's still a lot of tough times ahead.
OK, and briefly, Chris, Britain's Sky Television has paid pretty dearly to hold on to the rights to broadcast English Premier League football. What do investors make of that?
Well, not a positive reaction, really. I think they're concerned that the cost will continue to escalate. And, of course, we've seen BT shares, the big rival, rise today because they seem to have got the better deal. This Premier League football deal is one where the costs just go up. And people are concerned that really this puts Sky in a bit of a bind, big fixed costs for the year ahead. OK, Sky shares down nearly 5% today. Thanks very much indeed, Chris Beecham. Overall, the main share index here in London finished down 0.5% at 6,818. The Dow's also down 0.5%, 17,832. Now, it's an expensive business having children. I should know. I'm on to my third. Don't get me wrong, though. It is, of course, a wonderful experience. But you do need to be braced for the impact on your bank balance, especially as they get older, what with all those demands for trips and lessons and whatnot. Well, the BBC's Mariko Oy has been exploring the global costs of childbirth as she compares her own experiences of preparing for motherhood.
I was 7 weeks pregnant when I went for my first ultrasound. I wasn't even 100% sure if I was pregnant. And then I heard this. The heartbeat is my daughter, making me realize that there really was a little person inside me. Ever since then, regular checkups became the highlight of my pregnancy. But after every hospital visit, the joy was overshadowed by the reality of just how much this whole experience was costing. So I decided to reflect on my own experience of the economics of giving birth and how it compares with women elsewhere in the world. I'm from Japan and my husband is from the UK. So if we were living in Japan, we would pay about $4,000 for me to give birth. But then the Japanese government would give us an allowance for contributing to the population growth, so we wouldn't be much out of pocket. In the UK, we would have been covered by the National Health Service. But I decided to give birth in Singapore, where I have lived since 2006. And here it cost us $7,000. Pricey. But in the US, the average price is more than 4 times that. So why is it so expensive in the US? I asked Tom Sackville from International Federation of Health Plans.
It's a market failure that the provider side in America is so powerful, competition is not working.
And according to the OECD, medical costs in the US are significantly higher than elsewhere. Luca Lorenzoni of the OECD told me why.
It could be related to higher salaries, and it could also be linked to a more market-oriented type of healthcare system.
Is it fair to say that women in the US get better service because they pay more?
There are areas where we see very positive result. I'm referring in particular to cancer care, while in other areas like primary care, the United States are not that good as compared to other OECD countries. So there is no evidence that spending more provides better results.
But way before going into labour, preparing for your child's arrival is also costly. I panicked when I saw a list of things that I needed to buy in a magazine. From the cot to the stroller, they all add up. I sought some expert advice from Sarah Willingham. She's a mother of 4 who's learned how to prepare for a new addition to the family without spending a fortune.
When you're pregnant with your first baby, it is like you go onto some massive database somewhere and everybody just bombards you. And it also, somehow you're open to advertising. So everywhere you walk, you feel like everybody's advertising to you. And actually, if you listen to what everybody said to you, you would spend a fortune. Things like the sterilisers and your nappy sacks and nappy bins and baby baths and all that stuff, I would say you don't need them. Our baby bathed in a bucket and they loved it. They sat upright, each one of them bathed in buckets till they were 6 months old. It was fantastic.
Some down-to-earth advice there. That's a report from the BBC's Mariko Oyen. If you want to hear more about the global cost of childbirth, just search online for the BBC Business Daily podcast. Now, how would you fancy living in a world filled with driverless cars? I'm guessing it's a thought which might not necessarily fill you with joy. Well, too bad, because the tech giant Google and pretty much every major automaker are all developing what they like to call autonomous cars. Here in Britain, official tests on driverless cars are underway in a number of cities. 4 different designs were unveiled in London today, including a shuttle-type thing which looks like a big golf cart. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott went along for the ride.
Well, let me describe where I am. First of all, this is Greenwich. So this is in South London, where they get Greenwich Mean Time from. And we're right by a big pedestrian area. There's lots of people milling about. And effectively, I've just got into what looks like a giant golf buggy. And everyone, all of you people, can just get on here, touch this screen here. Hang on a sec. Welcome aboard, it's saying. My destination, press start. And in theory, we now set off driving, except that no one is driving. A computer is driving. There's no steering wheel. There's just some seats on board, and away we go. Navigating some trees and some human beings here as well. You'll hear it say obstacle if a person gets in the way. I'm joined by Nick Reeve from Transport Research Laboratory, and also by Pierre Lefebvre from Phoenix Wings. And Nick, what is the point of this experiment? Because, I mean, Britain, we are now being told, is leading the way, because these are going on public streets, public roads, pavements, like we are now, with people milling all around us.
So the point of the trials that we're running is to look at how people learn to trust and accept this technology. And through these trials, we can really place Britain at the forefront of the market. We're well equipped with a great automotive sector. With the addition of automation technologies and driverless vehicles, we can really take advantage of the market.
Guys, give me a second. I'm going to get us going the other way now, because you can just plug in a number of preset destinations, can't you? It's like a tablet computer, really. I'm just pressing various things. I've pressed start, the doors close again, and away we go again. Pierre, what's the big technological challenge here? Because they've been talking about driverless cars for decades. Are we really getting there now, or are we still a long way off?
Well, it depends on what kind of driverless car you're looking for. One of the things, obviously, is localization. The other one is the mapping. You need quite a very accurate and up-to-date map.
Because you can't use GPS on this, can you? You've got to be within, centimetres of missing bollards and things. So this is all lasers, isn't it, and radar?
Yes, localization is made by radars. The thing is, GPS sometimes is not accurate at all. I would say in Paris, in some places, we are 80 meters from the real point, which is far from the right accuracy for a robot, So here we have a centimetric accuracy localization.
Nick, realistically, when is the day when we go into a showroom and actually buy an autonomous car?
I think that's many years away yet because of the complexity of driving road vehicles autonomously. What we will see sooner is the ability to ride on driverless vehicles like this shuttle, and that can really improve urban mobility.
Great, well, we've reached our destination. We basically navigated all the obstacles in front of us perfectly safely. Thanks very much, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The BBC's transport correspondent Richard Westcott there. You're listening to the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. Hello to our listeners in Barbados on 92.1 FM and also in the Middle East on shortwave 7.195 megahertz. Well, it's not been a great week for fans of a couple of heavyweight US television presenters. Brian Williams, NBC's lead news anchor, as such people are known in America, has been suspended without pay for 6 months. He wrongly claimed he was in a helicopter hit by a grenade while covering the Iraq War in 2003. This was Brian Williams apologising for what he did.
This was a bungled attempt by me to thank one special veteran and, by extension, our brave military men and women, veterans everywhere, those who have served while I did not. I hope they know they have my greatest respect and also now my apology.
Then Jon Stewart said that he was stepping down as host of Comedy Central's Daily Show, a satirical look at the day's news, after almost 17 years. This was Jon Stewart's take on what Brian Williams had done.
Why? Why, Bri? Why, Bri lie?
Well, news of Jon Stewart's departure certainly got the Twitterati in a lather. The actor Hugh Laurie proclaimed himself devastated. Author J.K. Rowling's hashtag of choice, meanwhile, was British grief. But is it really such a big deal when these big-name presenters exit the stage? David Falkenflik is media correspondent for US National Public Radio. He's also written a book called Murdoch's World, Last of the Old Media Empires.
I think it is a big deal. I think that you really haven't seen this kind of public rebuke to the nation's leading, most watched television news anchor for his journalism. For Williams, this is an incredible blow to his credibility. And if you think of Jon Stewart, by very different contrast, he's going out at the top of his game over the 15, 16 years that he's held the anchor's test at The Daily Show. He's really not only provided good comedy for a lot of people, but a satiric lens through which to look at the political establishment and the failings of the press, too.
When it comes to these big-name news anchors, the likes of Brian Williams, they've grown to become quite powerful there in the US, haven't they? Let's just pause for a second and have a listen to a few of them from down the years.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern.
Good evening, everyone. From the west side of the Berlin Wall at the Brandenburg Gate, I'm Tom Brokaw. The sound that you hear and what you're seeing tonight, not hammers and sickles, but hammers and chisels as young people take down.
And also tonight we are awaiting that other Nobel, the Nobel Peace Prize. Tonight, the youngest nominee is a 16-year-old girl.
That was Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw and Diane Sawyer. So, David, do you think those news anchors, are they as powerful as they used to be? Do they still have the same trust as they did to the American people in the days of, say, Walter Cronkite?
They don't, and they don't for a couple of reasons. One is obviously the fragmentation of the audience. We have a lot more channels than the 3 big networks we used to have, where most of the nation would huddle together around the TV and watch what they were defining as news. Now there are a lot of other outlets. We know the news from Twitter. We know the news from Facebook instantly. I mean, even quicker than we know it from cable news. And so there are all these other layers of news that we go through before people sit down to get through them. And it's reflected in their audiences. Their audiences are much older than the population at large. By the same token, we also live in an age where it's easier than ever to hold even the famous and powerful accountable for their public statements. What it does is it chips away at the aura and seemingly invincible, ironclad reputations that these figures once held. What those nightly news anchors do is they define the network. They are the face of the network. They are the way in which the network signal to the public they're still in the business of public service. And when you have somebody whose credibility is damaged, then that's a tough, tough blow indeed.
And the issue of trust is an interesting one, isn't it? I was reading that Jon Stewart, on the face of it a comedy presenter, seems to have the trust of his audience. One poll suggested 44% of Americans see him as the best source for trustworthy news, and yet he's presenting a satirical show, whereas the likes of Brian Williams are presenting serious shows.
I would say that Jon Stewart has gained a lot of credibility. I think that he's an incredibly deft critic, as I've said, both the media and politics, and I think as a result, people appreciate that.
So which of the two networks do you think is going to end up being most damaged by these two departures? NBC with the departure of Brian Williams, or Comedy Central with the departure of Jon Stewart?
Well, that's a fair question. It's hard to know if The Daily Show can really survive in the same form without Stewart himself at the helm. I think it may well be able to do that. I think Comedy Central will be diminished. NBC, on the other hand, is in a real state of crisis. And NBC News has to act very carefully to ensure the credibility of all its journalists are not somehow diminished by all of this tumult surrounding it.
That was David Falkenflick, and he is media correspondent for US National Public Radio. Well, that's it from me, Mike Johnson, and this World Business Report. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to World Business Report from the BBC World Service. For more news and analysis, download Business Matters, our daily hour-long mix of current affairs and debate, published at breakfast time in Asia and Europe. We debate key trends in the worlds of work, politics, technology and the environment. Find it at bbc.com/podcasts. You can also follow us and get our latest audio at twitter.com/BBC World Biz and talk to us on Facebook at facebook.com/BBC Business.
And also Lynn Homer, she heads up Britain's tax authority. That's Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or HMRC. Our economics correspondent Andrew Verity watched what went on.
This was a really bad-tempered exchange. You're talking about a bunch of MPs who were livid with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs for not catching up with all of the tax evaders who they believed must be on the list that was leaked and stolen by Herr Falciani, the former HSBC Swiss employee. They thought HMRC, being in possession of such a treasure trove of evidence, should have been making more of it and trying to do something with it, yet there had only been one prosecution. Now, Her Majesty
HSBC colluded to help wealthy people and rich corporations hide money in Swiss bank accounts to avoid tax. The accounts aren't illegal, and there's no evidence that those who held them broke any tax rules. But the new revelations led to angry exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, with the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Ed Miliband, accusing David Cameron of failing to get to grips with the issue.
Linked to the HSBC tax avoidance scandal are 7 Tory donors, including a former treasurer of the Tory party, who between them have given nearly £5 million to the Conservative Party.
The economics of giving birth, why children are so much more expensive in some countries than others. We hop aboard the latest generation of driverless cars.
I've just got into what looks like a giant golf buggy. Touch this screen here. Welcome aboard, it's saying. Press start, set off driving, except that no one is driving. A computer is driving.
And as 2 of America's best-known television presenters step down, we'll hear how much damage that will do to the networks who employ them. How much did they know? When did they know it? And what did they do about it? Britain's tax authorities have been feeling the heat in Parliament today, following this week's allegations at the Bank H. This is Mike Johnson with the download edition of World Business Report for Wednesday, February the 11th. Allegations that the British bank HSBC colluded to help its customers avoid tax lead to angry exchanges in Parliament.
People should pay their taxes in our country, and no government has been tougher than this one in chasing down tax evasion and tax avoidance.
What next for cash-strapped Greece as European finance ministers meet to discuss its fate?
The only solution is exiting the euro, having its own highly devalued currency, and trying to struggle along in the world.
How can the Prime Minister explain the revolving door between Tory party HQ and the Swiss branch of HSBC?
I saw this list just before coming to Prime Minister's questions, and one of the people named is the Labour donor Lord Paul, who funded Gordon Brown's election campaign. I am very clear. People should pay their taxes in our country, and no government has been tougher than this one in chasing down tax evasion and tax avoidance.
There were angry exchanges too during a parliamentary committee session between MP Margaret Hodge, who's chair of the Public Accounts Committee,